We at the Speakers Forum are very happy to bring to you tonight our member Keith Ervin. He was raised in Falls Church, Virginia. He's a graduate of Oberlin College. His career was as a journalist. He spent 23 years with the Seattle Times, reporting on local government, business, education, and the environment. He also wrote a book, the 1989 book, Fragile Majesty, the battle for North America's last great forest. Keith retired from the Seattle Times in 2013. Keith and wife Cindy live in the Bryant neighborhood of North Seattle and joined Beit Aleph about 11 years ago. They also are members of Seattle First Baptist Church, where they sing in the sanctuary choir. That is when the choir is singing, which it has not been for a while due to, of course, COVID-19. They have 3 children and 2 grandsons, age 3 and 6, which Keith and Cindy helped to take care of, except today when they got 2 other children to take care of as well. So if Keith is looking a little tired today, we know why. Keith is a founding member of the Interfaith Climate Action First Hill group, which is a collaboration between Beit Aleph Meditative Synagogue and Seattle First Baptist Church. Along with Sydney, he is also active in several other climate action groups, including Green Buildings Now. And I am going to click a little button here, and I'm going to allow him to share the screen so that he can show us some pictures and proceed. Keith, thanks so much for joining us, and the screen is yours.
Thank you, Stu, and thank you everybody for joining tonight's program. Just kind of as just a sort of addendum to the introduction, the nice introduction you gave. I'm not the founding member of Interfaith Climate Action, but I am one of the founding members, and there are several other founding members here tonight. So it's good to see you and everybody here. It was kind of a very a challenging and personal sort of invitation to talk about civil disobedience and my experience with that. But I'm always happy to do what I can to sort of carry the message about the need for climate action, which is certainly part of the theme of what I'll talk about. So I guess the story maybe begins when I retired, and I retired from the Seattle Times in 2013. So we're now looking at 8 years ago. I sort of had some ideas of what I would do after I was retired. And they were all sort of, personal fulfillment kinds of things, I guess. I looked forward to hiking more, camping. I thought, I've long thought, golly, it'd be nice to learn how to sail a little boat, that I would do sailing lessons and do leisurely reading. And I had embarked on some study of modern Hebrew, and I thought, okay, I'll do more of that. So those were kind of that sort of life of leisure coupled with kind of leisurely activities was sort of what I planned, and things didn't turn out quite that way. For the first year, they kind of did, and I started taking auditing classes in Hebrew at UW, and that was great. And I never did the sailing lessons, but what did happen was what changed my life was a number of things. Kind of began with the birth of our first grandson, Mateo, in the fall of 2014. So that was 1 year after my retirement. The other thing was, that kind of coincided with that was that sort of kind of voice I was hearing in the back of my head that had sort of been nagging at me for years. But what about climate change? What about this, runaway freight train that's coming down the tracks directly at us? What relevance does that have for me? I've kind of watched as a spectator, from 1988 on, when NASA said, we see now that global warming is happening because we're actually measuring the increase in warmth. And we're going to tell you, here's our list of all the bad things that are going to happen to humanity if it continues. So for me, it was the nagging in my ear became louder. And so I audited a class in global warming, Introduction to Global Warming at UW, a lecture class with some breakouts, and learned about the science in a more detailed way. And it indeed reinforced my understanding that, we are on the precipice of some very bad things happening to the human race and many of the other species that we are endangering. So, that in conjunction with being the grandfather of this, little cuddly infant at the time, it brought me to a decision that, okay, I'm not going to my grave without doing something to address this issue. There is a movement. I can plug into that movement, and I will do that. So I, got on the mailing list, email lists of Sierra Club and other groups. And I think it was an email from Climate Action, if I'm not mistaken, that alerted me to the fact that the Port of Seattle was in the process, they were the next morning, I think it was, going to sign a lease for Terminal 5 down across the river from Harbor Island to be a base for Shell Oil to put its Arctic drilling rigs and use it as a jumping off base to see if they could exploit the Arctic Ocean. Maybe it's the Beaufort Sea. I don't remember. But to do in ocean oil drilling in that Arctic environment. And it seemed like a supremely awful problem when we have to stop oil production. And I saw our local electeds opting instead to facilitate and accelerate the destruction of the planet that we were seeing. So I made my first phone call to the Port of Seattle headquarters and said I want to leave a message for the commissioners, and I asked them not to approve this lease. So that was the Rubicon I crossed initially that took me from kind of, being one more worried citizen to being a worried citizen who is acting on the worries and knowing that there are solutions that are right in front of our face if we had the political will to take the steps to have a non-fossil fuel-based economy. So that's how I got into climate activism. I found it well, I won't say distressing. I was disappointed that the two congregations with which I worship, Bet Holliff and First Baptist, um, although both are very socially conscious and have had some, great social activism of various kinds, um, there was no talk about global warming, climate change, the impending destruction of um, much of our much of what makes civilized life possible. Um, so I started talking to a few people I knew, and saying, are you as concerned as I am? And if you are, should we maybe think about forming a little group to talk about what we can do? And Alan Ness was one of those folks, and I think Susan maybe came along shortly thereafter. And we met in my living room a few times, and Interfaith Climate Action First Hill was born. And basically our mission was to educate ourselves and our communities about the issues around climate change, and secondly to support policies that would lead to solutions, and to fight things that would be worsening the problem. So and here I'm going to, at this juncture, put up some slides, and let's see if I can do this successfully. So here are some of the members of Interfaith Climate Action, some people who've been from both congregations. Let me just see if I can, there we go. There we are at one of the events we went to. I think this was a demonstration at Puget Sound Energy, urging them to get off coal and get into renewables. This one I think was definitely at that particular site, and some of you will recognize some of the faces here. Probably, and anybody here who was in Seattle at the time will remember the Shell No campaign and the Kai activists who fought against the Shell oil rig that you could see there in that picture. And of course, they didn't stop, that and a ship from sailing, but some months later, Shell had not had much success with their drilling, and they, I think, found that this citizen opposition was not making their company look very good. And they said, we're not going to do any more drilling in the Arctic. So that was a great success. Another view of some of us from Interfaith Climate Action. So we started this group in 2015, and that was the year that the nations of the world met in Paris to see if they could come up with an international agreement to address the climate problem, the climate crisis. And indeed, they did agree on an accord that basically committed each nation, in every nation of the world except one or two, and then I think both of them came around, signed this and said, here's how much we're going to cut emissions. And worldwide, there was a target set. Well, the problem with this was that even though this was a big step in the right direction, the promises that the countries made to move toward that target of reduction of emissions by certain dates, the commitments weren't strong enough to get there. The second problem was some of the countries like the United States that pledged to get the job done didn't have a plan for how to get the job done. So that led some of the the activist groups, climate groups, to call for a series of protests that worldwide, and they were called, it was called Break Free from Fossil Fuels. And this was going to happen in the spring of 2016. And that was my first introduction to doing direct action, nonviolent direct action, which potentially would involve breaking the law. And this particular slide has nothing to do with that. It's one more activity of interfaith climate action. And here we are. You'll see a familiar rabbi and former administrator of Bet Aleph and some other familiar faces planting trees at Magnuson Park. The tree plantings were a lot of fun. And now that COVID's over, maybe we'll resume them one of these days. So during the International Days of Action for Break Free, one of the targets that was selected by activists in the Northwest, and particularly 350.org, which is the largest grassroots climate group on the planet, they chose the oil refineries at Anacortes. They're on March Point, just outside the city limits. And this is a photograph of one of the refineries, or both, with Mount Baker in the background. So they bring in a lot of crude oil from various locations. I think quite a bit comes from British Columbia, and a lot comes from the North Dakota area. And it comes primarily by rail car. And one of the two companies that refines, this is the largest set of refineries in the Northwest. I think they produce about 57% of the gasoline that is consumed in this part of the country. I'm finding myself distracted by that phone call, but so I'm just going to move on to the next slide. The goal of this blockade, when I signed up, I went to a training, kind of what are the principles of nonviolent direct action? How do we organize ourselves? How do we communicate? How do we stay nonviolent? How do we let people know our aims without sending confusing messages? And a week before the action, I went to an organizing meeting and became part of an affinity group, which is a small group of people. And I think we had about a dozen who say, yeah, we want to participate in this protest. And we didn't know exactly. We knew that there were going to be it was going to be a large public demonstration on a Saturday right outside the refinery on the beach. And we also knew there was going to be a civil disobedience. And we, in these affinity groups, were preparing to support or do civil disobedience. And some people would be making themselves liable, vulnerable to being arrested, and others would be acting in a support role. My affinity group and a number of others met the day before. On a Thursday, we went up to a farm in Skagit County, and not terribly far from Anacortes, maybe about 30 miles away, and did some planning. We sort of learned the game plan. We learned that we learned that there was going to be a blockade of some kind. We already knew there was going to be a blockade of some kind. What we knew was that the thinking was that we would do it on the railroad tracks. That this rail line is used for the sole purpose of bringing tanker cars filled with crude oil into the plant. And Shell at that point which is one of the two refiners, had a proposal on the table to add a second line going into its portion of the facility so they could expand production. And we were specifically objecting to any expansion of use of fossil fuels. And we were calling for 100%, for us to move to 100% renewables, that we have to do that if we are going to get ourselves out of the predicament that we are in. So this is you see this structure here is basically it's scaffolding, the kind of scaffolding that people use to work on construction or renovation of buildings. And early in the, I'll just tell you a little bit about my own misgivings. I had no hesitation to take part in this protest. I did sort of feel I was maybe one of the more straight arrows among the organizers, one of the less kind of vocally leftist, radical, anti-imperialist members of the contingent. And I volunteered as a preparation to help one of the folks do a dry run in putting together the scaffolding to see how it would do. And then I realized I was being asked to actually assemble it on the railroad tracks as well. I said, Leonard, I'll help you put it up right now, but I don't think I'm comfortable putting up a structure on a railroad track. I came here prepared to perhaps make myself vulnerable to a misdemeanor criminal charge, but this looks like potential felony territory to me. I'm afraid. I'm not doing it. And he said, he was very understanding and said, of course not. Don't do what's outside your comfort level. So instead, I carried a couple flag poles. You'll see a couple flags with signs in the background there. And basically, you can't see them here in this particular picture, but after we all arrived late on early on Friday evening in April, on a kind of, you'll see, overcast but otherwise nice April day. These are some of the people here were prepared to sort of lock down, and they had these tubes to lock to each other to make it more difficult in case of police action to be arrested and taken into custody. The group in the white coveralls and the silver kind of things are, they're students from Seattle University. This was a wonderful multi-age gathering. And behind them, you will see a yellow and black kind of a device being used by another group prepared to who are actually locked down as we look at them, although they didn't stay in permanent lockdown during this blockade. And that group was kind of some 20 and 30-year-olds. They call themselves Save the Bees. And you can see their devices were kind of a bumblebee color. So basically we camped on the tracks. I brought a little pup tent. We had, we had cardboard. We brought pieces of cardboard to make it, lying on the railroad ties and the gravel to make it a little softer. And actually the first night it was quite comfortable. We didn't have any idea, how the police would respond. They came and took a look at us. They walked through the site that Friday evening. They did not take any action to stop us at that point. So this blockade lasted, we were prepared to stay at least through Saturday. Some of the people had to go back to work and had other reasons they couldn't stay longer. People came and went because of their schedules. During the day on Saturday was the big legal demonstration where people with a permit marched and heard speeches, and while a number of us held down this site to make sure we had a presence. And there were about, I think, 80 of us who initially showed up there. During Saturday, there were people camping legally at Deception Pass State Park. They were invited to come and join us on Saturday night. And by Saturday night, we had probably 150 or 200 people sleeping on or near these railroad tracks. And this is a photo of the initial group of occupiers that I was part of. This was also a group, but you see in the foreground the roof of a van, and it actually, the sides of the van are painted like an orca, and so everybody called it the orca van. And the affinity group that brought it and parked it right on the railroad track on Market to Farm Road had put a hole in the bottom of the van so that one person would lie under the van, another person would lie in the van, and they would be attached to each other. Their arms would be attached to each other. So they could stay in that position as long as, and when the police, and just to kind of jump ahead in the story, the police did take action on Sunday, and they had such a hard time figuring out how the heck are we going to get these two people separated, the person under the van and the person in the van. And they finally said, you know what, if you will just move your van, we won't arrest you. And so they said, okay, we can live with that. And they moved the van, which I thought was kind of a sort of a funny solution. This is the legal march that happened, and you'll see a lot of Native folks in the lead here. This is the Seattle U folks in their lockdown position. And there are the Seattle U folks on Sunday morning. So Sunday morning, I was sleeping. I had, with other members of my affinity group, kind of stood watch. We had people kind of at a welcome table, but also keeping an eye out for, is there anybody, planning to come in and do violence to us, or our police on the way. And I went to bed, and then at 5 a.m, I heard a lot of honking of vehicles going past us on the highway, because we were really only 50, 75 feet from a highway, Highway 20. And they were just laying on their horns. And I think it was maybe some of the refinery workers who might not have been happy with us, trying to wake us up. And I hadn't even gone back to sleep before I heard a shout, the police are coming, the police are here, the police are here, get up. So I got out of my tent, looked around, didn't see any police yet. I thought, you know what, I really need to go to the bathroom. I don't have time to go all the way to the porta potty. So I just kind of went down the embankment next to the tracks and started peeing. And at that moment, in mid operation, these officers with flak jackets and rifles in hand showed up. They basically lined the railroad tracks. There were 2 busloads of them. It was an incredible show of force. And they said, put your hands in the air. And I, even though I hadn't finished quite doing my business, I thought maybe I better put my hands in the air. I don't want to be shot for the glory of being able to finish doing my business. So I zipped up and put my hands in the air and climbed back up to the tracks. We were given 15 minutes to pack up and get out. We were told you are trespassing, and you will be, if you do not leave in 15 minutes, you will be arrested on charges of second-degree trespass. Um, the groups that locked down were locking down. A number of others of us, and with the 200 people, many of them, most of them left. They weren't intending to get arrested. But a number of us were, and we were trying to figure out, so we were kind of down on the bottom below the embankment, and we all just huddled and said, what do we do now? And we decided, oh, we'll walk as if we're walking toward the exit, which would be Market to Farm Road. And then we will cut up and go back to the tracks and sit down. So we sat there on the tracks. We talked, people told poems. We were there for, I think, 2 hours. When a police action happens, it's very slow. And I have to say that this was the Washington State Patrol. And in my experience, they acted very professionally. They had that show of force, but they did not mishandle me. I didn't see them mishandle any individuals. They did not use any excessive force. They were respectful. My arresting officer was quite nice. So, yeah. If any of you have happened to see the movie called The Reluctant Radical, it's a portrait of one activist, and it's that gentleman in the fleece jacket on the right of this photograph, Ken Ward. And he later was involved with 5 other people in shutting off all of the oil coming from the Canada tar sands into the United States. They closed the valves on 5 different pipelines. And so he ended up facing a felony trial after his misdemeanor trial in Skagit County Court. And there I am being taken away. While we're sitting on the tracks, one of the chants that we said was, people gonna rise like the water, gonna calm this crisis down. I hear the voice of my great granddaughter, gotta stop these oil trains now. So that kind of thinking of the next generations, that we're here for us, and we're here for our children, and we're here for our grandchildren. And that was kind of what I took away from that. This is the woman sitting on the tracks was one of the 3 people I rode up there with, and a member of my affinity group, Claudia. And she was the very last one arrested. There she is. They'd taken everybody else away. They finally took her. It was a long wait. So I won't go into a lot of the aftermath here. If anybody wants to ask questions, we did go on trial. We pleaded not guilty. The group I was tried with, actually, we got a hung jury, and they moved to retry us. And we chose not to undergo a second trial. We accepted a plea deal at that point. So, let me just go back for a second. After this, we were taken to a police station, kind of a rural police station, to sit there for a little while, and all our belongings were taken, and we were processed. And then we were shackled. Our hands and our feet were shackled, and we were led out to buses that took us to Mount Vernon, where the Skagit County courthouse is and the Skagit County Jail, and we were parked outside the jail. The jail was full, so they didn't book anybody into the jail. We just sat in the bus for hours and hours. And but when it was on the way home, when I was traveling with my two other people, Steve and Claudia, we talked about what a special thing we had been part of. And when I the next morning, I prayed, and I prayed, God, thank you for allowing me the privilege of being part of this event. It felt, it was a privilege. And I'll just kind of tell you a little bit more as I told you, I kind of had sort of misgivings, or kind of feeling a little bit like a fish out of water at times as we were preparing for that action on the farm. And here I'm just gonna stop sharing for just a moment, because if I can find my cursor, which I have lost. Why have I lost my cursor? Oh, here, let's try that. Okay. So I think one of the significant things about non-violent direct action is it can change the people who do it in many different kinds of ways. And I don't know that in what ways it changed me, but it deeply affected me. I guess I would say. The following morning, actually, to go back, after we had camped at the farm the night before occupying the railroad tracks, I was having coffee with Steve, one of the people that I had carpooled with, and Steve made a dynamite espresso, and we got to chatting. It turned out he, like I am, is a recovering alcoholic and active in Alcoholics Anonymous. And, I suddenly felt, I might be a fish out of water, but I have somebody here with a special connection to. And that really helped me through the process. Then on the following Monday, I should say, we set up that blockade on a Friday evening. We were there all day Saturday. We were there through Saturday night, and 36 hours after we first went there, that was when the police moved in. So we were there for quite a long time. So that was Sunday morning. Sunday afternoon, we were released from custody. Monday morning, I went to my AA meeting as usual, and a couple of people there. On my way, that was when I said that prayer, of gratitude, and a couple of people there knew I was going to be doing some kind of action and asked me about it very warmly, and we had some very meaningful conversations. And I just felt this kind of merger of two parts of my life, the recovery part and the activist part of my life. And they had come together in a couple of different kinds of ways. And for whatever reason, that was just a deeply moving thing to me. And all I can describe it as is my heart broke open. I was just that morning filled with outgoing love for my fellow man and woman, and my grandson Mateo, who I was taking care of that morning when I came home, and had that little toddler. He wasn't even quite a toddler yet, but he was just the kind of older baby that you hold in your arms. And it was, anyway, that was just kind of part of, and it's not like that would happen every time or to everybody who does this kind of thing. I'm going to just kind of fast forward a little bit through some other stuff, lest I go on too long. I see I'm getting a little bit long, but I'd like to walk you through one more experience. And this was basically, I've done nonviolent civil disobedience 3 times now. Once on the railroad tracks and twice in Chase Bank branches. And you might ask, well, why would I be in a Chase Bank branch? And some of you know, and that's because Chase is the world's biggest lender of money to fossil fuel infrastructure projects. And since the Paris Agreement that's supposed to get us off fossil fuels, boy, as of 2 years ago, I think it was, they had lent something like $100 billion to fossil fuel expansion projects, pipelines, refineries, you name it, coal mines. So a number of us from Faith Action Climate Team, which is another organization, went into a branch, and here's where we gathered at the light rail station on Capitol Hill. We walked down Broadway and went to the bank near the QFC, and this is Harriet Platts, who was a recent president of Seattle First Baptist Church and an ordained minister, creating a sacred space, saying a prayer that set our intention and explained why we were there. Many of us sat on the floor. This is Beth Chronister is a minister at University Unitarian Church, and behind me is Imogene Williams from Seattle First Baptist. She participated in civil disobedience 3 times. She sat on the railroad tracks in Vancouver to block oil trains, and then she joined us in the Chase Bank, and she participated in another Chase Bank action alongside me and other people in the fall of 2019. This was in 2017. The police had been there, and most of the people who were inside the bank had left. This was a lovely action. I mean, we said prayers, we meditated, we sat in silence. We talked about why we were there. We had personal statements. And I just like to share a part of a poem that I heard for the first time while sitting on the floor. Our friend Abby, and I don't know if Abby's, she didn't show up in any of the pictures here that I think she does show up outside the church somewhere. Well, I say the church. Some people came in, one person said, what is this? Is this a bank or is this a church service? It was a non-denominational church service, I would say. So this poem is written by Drew Dellinger, and Abby read it as we sat on the floor. It's 3:23 in the morning, and I'm awake because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something when the seasons started failing, as the mammals, reptiles, birds were all dying. Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew? And there's somebody who's maybe, there were people outside in a support role as well as people inside. The high point for me was at one point the bank doors were open. We were inside singing For the Beauty of the Earth. And the people outside started picking up the tune and singing For the Beauty of the Earth. And we were a choir inside and outside the bank. And of course, the arrests inevitably came. There were 4 of us arrested, 2 women, 2 men. There's Iris getting arrested, and behind her, Lynn, also arrested. There's my friend Lanny. The police officer on the left with the white hair is Lieutenant Ballinger, who was directing. He was in charge of the operation. He was the commander. He pleaded with us. He said, please, please leave the bank. Please don't make us arrest you. We don't want to arrest you, but we will have to if you stay. And we stayed. We said if the bank would, well, if the bank can this afternoon stop lending to fossil fuel companies, we'll leave. But we knew there wasn't much time for New York to do that, make that decision. But Lieutenant Ballinger was quite wonderful. And there's Imogene again. Now, Imogene stayed in the bank. She refused to leave. And Lieutenant Ballinger refused to arrest her. And Imogene was very upset because she felt she was betraying her comrades if she didn't get arrested along with the rest of us. Lieutenant Ballinger said, well, I have a conscience. I'm not going to arrest you. And she said, well, I have a conscience too, and that's why I'm here, and I want you to arrest me. She got in the patrol car. She was so determined, but they threw her out. I like this quote from Bill McKibben. Bill McKibben is the founder of 350.org. And if you're not familiar with it, I think I mentioned it earlier, didn't I? Getting arrested isn't the end of the world. The end of the world is the end of the world. And he didn't say, I would just add to that. And the reason some of us choose to get arrested at times is we're trying to prevent the end of the world. Bill, in one of his talks in Seattle, when I heard him, and I'm trying to get out of this, screen share. Okay, let's see, what have I done? Okay. Hi. Bill McKibben said, we can't really expect young people in any great numbers to commit civil disobedience. They have their lives and their careers ahead of them, and they have a lot to lose. But those of us who are retired, we don't. We're not going to be destroying our career if we get an arrest on our record. And what the value of it is or isn't, we could debate, but I think most social movements that encounter incredible opposition and where public opinion is maybe kind of not focused on the subject, sometimes we need it. Sometimes we need it to move the issue forward. And I think civil disobedience has helped in this arena. We haven't had as much of it as we could. But one example of where it was very effective, I think, was where Bill McKibben and 350 organized demonstrations against the Keystone XL pipeline, I believe in 2011 or 2012, and 1,200 people over a period of days went to jail in Washington, D.C., outside the White House. That helped shift public opinion and policy leaders' views. And it was after that Obama switched direction and withdrew his support for that pipeline, which got whipped around by Trump and whipped back, killed again for the second time by President Biden. In the case of the 52 people, me among them, who were arrested on the railroad tracks in Anacortes, Shell Oil abandoned putting in a second line to expand their refinery. was that related to our being out there and a protest movement focusing on them? I don't know. But it might have been. I don't know. I'm no expert on the effects of it. I just know that for me, doing civil disobedience is just one part of my activism. Perhaps the more important part is being willing to do something, to write letters, to meet with my legislators and tell them why it's important to me that they pass strong climate bills, encouraging my friends to take their money away from banks like Chase Bank and Bank of America, which are funding fossil fuel infrastructure, and go to a better bank or go to a credit union. Those are important too. But, for me, the direct action has, was important to me because it, in among other things, it helped me to kind of know what my own level of commitment is, that the planet is in danger, the human race is in danger, and for me, just writing letters and showing up in a crowd, doing a piece, a legal march, until we get tens of millions of people out of the street, it doesn't feel like enough. We're not getting far enough, fast enough. We have a Congress that isn't about to do anything. We're still in a desperate situation. I mean, we have a president who wants to do the right thing, and he doesn't have the power to make that happen. So we have to make that happen. So thank you for your kind attention. And I will be happy to answer any questions. Stu, do you want to kind of manage things here, or how should we do this?
Well, I'm happy to ask the first question, and then I think people can just jump in. I'm curious, you wrote a book, Fragile Majesty, The Battle for North America's Last Great Forest. Would you tell us why you wrote the book? What was it about, and what happened to the forest?
Yeah, good question. This was back in the 1980s. I was at the time, before I envisioned the book, I was writing for the Seattle Weekly, which, does it even exist anymore? I don't think so. And was, among other things, covering environmental issues, and began to learn about this controversy about old growth forests and the spotted owl, which is a creature that scientists had really just then come to understand needs this particular kind of habitat to survive. And it was a clearly endangered species and losing its population rapidly because of logging. So I wrote this book because these incredible forests of, in some cases, 1,000-year-old trees, these Doug fir forests and Western red cedar forests are just one of the treasures of the natural world. And so I, wrote the book that described the controversy, what the stakes are. It came out in 1989, and I would like to think had some small role in influencing public opinion. But yeah, that was shortly before Bill Clinton was elected to the presidency in 1992. Am I getting my years right here? While the Republican administrations had been logging the hell out of the forests, and I'm particularly talking about the forests that we, the American people, own, the national forests. Clinton began to turn that around, and we had some good governors in Washington State who turned things around a little bit at the level of managing state forests so that more areas are remaining uncut, and areas that are being cut on public lands are usually cut in a way less drastically than total clear cutting. But yeah, it's been a little too late. I mean, by that time, 95% of or so of the old growth forests were cut down, and we've lost a magnificent treasure. The spotted owl is in great danger, and more of its territory keeps getting invaded by the barred owl, a different species that can thrive on fragmented habitats where the more specialized spotted owl is potentially doomed.
Are there any other questions for Keith?
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. This isn't as much of a question as much as I would love to hear him comment. I'm guessing I am not the only person out there that is both a lover of the natural world. I mean, I am at my happiest when I'm hiking or backpacking, but I am also addicted to travel. And so how do you balance, the idea of getting on a jet plane to the other side of the world and keeping the lovely natural world that we've got all around the world?
Yeah. Well, excellent question. Thank you. And I'm sure we've met, but remind me of what your name is?
Barry.
Barry, thank you. Well, Barry, I'll just drop back to 2016, which was kind of a big year for me in a number of ways. That was the year of the Break Free blockade. That year, I flew on three flights. I flew. What was the first one? The first one was to, I think, my 50th college reunion in Virginia. Cindy and I flew to Hawaii to vacation with friends, and in December I flew to Detroit to go to my niece's wedding. So I would say that probably those flights together probably caused between 3 to 6 tons of carbon emissions into the atmosphere, which is equivalent to the annual emissions associated with a lifestyle of most of the average person in a third world country, 1.5 tons from everything they do. When we were preparing for trial for the Break Free thing, and I was having some conference calls from our vacation spot in Hawaii, I learned that my lawyer, Larry, he and his wife don't fly. And that was the first time that idea had entered my head, that you could choose to not fly. So I for me, and everybody has to make their own choice. I make the decision that where I can change my lifestyle and still have a good life, and by changing my lifestyle, reduce my carbon emissions drastically, I will do so. I know people who will spend immense amount of energy on making their recycling a wee bit better. And that doesn't have very much impact, for instance, on carbon emissions. But I'll tell you, driving a car or flying an airplane has enormous consequences. I mean, okay, one person, if we only had one person on the planet who was doing that, it wouldn't matter. But multiplied by a couple billion people in the developing world living at our kind of lifestyle, it's unsustainable. So I find, yeah, so the only thing I've really had to give up is flying, and I've chosen to do that. And so we tend to do our vacationing and in the Northwest, and we're discovering wonderful things right here in our own backyard. And other things, there's so many ways of not driving a gas mobile these days. If you live in a city like Seattle, it might be possible to go on public transportation and Uber to meet all our needs. Our choice has been to buy a used plug-in hybrid car, which burns gas after, we use up the electrical charge. But around town, we almost never use any gasoline. It's only on our trips we use any gas at all. So we, and then again, and the other thing is just getting rid of our gas furnace, our gas water heater, our gas range. It's been about a 2-year process, I think, to make that transition to an all-electric household. It's more money up front than replacing a gas stove, but gas furnaces in particular are getting up there in the level of air flights and automobiles. So I just say this to kind of put in perspective what are the things that are the really big kind of gas guzzlers that are most harmful to the planet. So my personal choice is, I look for what actions will make the most difference, and is there a way I can make those actions? That's kind of the lens I use.
Thank you.
Well, this has been a very informative time for us. I have a keen respect. This is Bill Teraday speaking. I have a keen respect for the way you've used your time. And aside from your official program, I have a keen respect for somebody like yourself who publicly fesses up to being a recovering alcoholic. I think it's a testament to your current station in life and how you feel secure to even utter those words. So I tip my hat to you for that as well.
Thank you, Bill. Maybe that made it more possible for me to be willing to do civil disobedience. I was, part of my story is that I was arrested twice for drunk driving, and so I've had arrests that I felt deep shame for, and now I have had arrests for which I feel I'm kind of doing my duty and trying to give back. So it's been an interesting journey.
Keith, would you tell us a little about the green action? I'm a bit at a loss for words, but you're working with a group in Seattle to convert a community center heating system in a way to make a significant impact on their energy consumption and expenses. Could you mention that?
Sure. Yeah. We call that venture green buildings now. And you've probably, heard a bit about it from Rabbi Olivier, who it's because it's the recipient for the tzedakah donations this quarter. And in a nutshell, yeah. So Interfaith Climate Action, we had been working with Seattle First Baptist to, the church was buying carbon offsets for the last 6 years at our behest to offset the damage done by the gas furnace that heats up a boiler and heats our worship complex. But for various reasons I won't go into right now, we became increasingly disillusioned with carbon offsets as an answer we're entirely comfortable with. So, we looked, are there ways we can maybe apply some dollars in our own community that would help reduce carbon emissions and maybe serve an educational purpose as well? And so we started looking at maybe helping either individuals or groups replace their gas furnaces with heat pumps, electric heat pumps, which use clean electricity from hydro in the city of Seattle. Where we ended up by talking with some BIPOC leaders from some organizations like Got Green, which is an environmental justice group, and Bethany United Church of Christ, we agreed to fund weatherization and decarbonization on the Bethany campus. And the Bethany campus is kind of serving as a center for a lot of groups. There's a Black Power epicenter. There's a Nurturing Roots farm. There's a Refugee Women's Alliance preschool. And so all those organizations will benefit from having less energy use because of weatherizing, and they will benefit from, or we all benefit from the conversion from gas and oil appliances to electric appliances that will not cause carbon emissions. So in that infinitesimal way, at this point, Green Buildings now is helping to reduce carbon emissions and also help meet the goals of these community groups. They had this ambition to do this. They heard about us, and we thought, okay, we can work together because our goals coincide.
Well, it seemed to me like there was a great coalescing, because when I first heard about the project, it was to do this with individual houses. And then that seemed like you weren't gonna, yes, it would help, but it wouldn't have a whole lot of impact. And then you found this community center where you could really have an impact. And I was very impressed with that. So where is that project now? What's happening?
What's happening is, we have to have not yet heard the results of an energy audit that was done last month. So we're looking forward to meeting with the community leaders and finding out, sort of what devices they have, what it will cost to replace them, and how thoroughgoing a job do they want to do in decarbonizing. We think the cost of this at the highest end could be as much as $150,000 for the up to 4 buildings, if they do all 4. And we've had remarkable success and support. I mean, I'm just bowled over. Seattle First Baptist, their outreach commission threw in $4,000. They were the first contributor. They said, you get the money if you can match it. So we went out there and started telling our story, and we got some individual donations, and then we got a small foundation that pledged or gave $20,000. There was a Pass the Hat plate collection at University Unitarian a few weeks ago. They raised $11,000. So we now have $37,000 ready to buy heat pumps and whatever else, and weatherize. So we think this could be a 3-year process, and it because of the excellent response beyond anything I expected. Maybe it'll be a shorter period than that, but we're kind of looking at what do we do after this, working with this particular community. Where can we best find a partnership next? But we'll be working on this one for a while.
Okay. Well, Keith, thank you very much. It's been very illuminating and inspiring. And we appreciate your efforts and the time you put into bringing it all to us.